Mahoney. Welcome back to week 2 of Explained. I want to start today by telling a story. So back in the day, there was a guy and there was a girl. They were from 2 different tribes and they were getting married. At their wedding reception, the groom told a riddle to some guys and he bet them that they couldn't solve it. But these guys really wanted to solve the riddle. So they went to the new bride and they're like, hey, I know you just got married, but please, please, please tell us the answer. P.S. If you don't, we're going to kill you and we're going to kill your parents. Got it? Sheesh. So the bride ends up begging the groom, like, please tell me the answer. I really want to know what it is. So he caves. He tells her the answer to the riddle. She passes on the information to the guys at the wedding. They solve the riddle. They won the bet. They tell the groom, we know the answer. And what does the groom do? He gets so unhappy. He loses his temper. He kills a bunch of wedding guests and then he leaves town, which is a total overreaction. So the bride's dad is like, wow, that is the worst wedding reception I've ever been to in my whole life. So he's like, well, the groom's gone. So he marries off his daughter that just got married to this groom to somebody else. But then a little while later, the groom comes back and is like, hey, where's my bride? And the dad's like, oh, dang, I thought you were gone. So I let her marry somebody else. Why don't you just marry my younger daughter? Because she's super cute and prettier than her older sister anyways, which is crazy. So then the groom once again says no, freaks out, flips the world upside down, finds these foxes, ties their tails together, light it on fire. The foxes are going nuts. They're running through the town. They start a wildfire. It burns down a bunch of grains. It burns down vineyards. It burns down an olive grove. That's insane, right? But here's the deal. This story, not verbatim, but something like that is found in the Old Testament in Judges chapter 14 and Judges chapter 15. And as a kid, when I would hear Bible stories like this, I would think, so is my lesson like don't light foxes on fire? Like, what does that have to do with me? What does that have to do with anything? I don't even understand, like, okay, so don't say riddles at weddings. Not that I would get the answer right to a riddle anyways. But last time we met, we started the conversation about the Bible and about how Jesus is the main point of the Bible. And actually, Jesus is kind of like putting on those 3D glasses. He just makes everything clearer. But the truth is that Jesus doesn't show up, the name Jesus, in a lot of what we read, like Jesus. He doesn't appear in the story about the foxtails. Jesus helps us to see God more clearly, and he helps us to see the whole story of God and humans more clearly. But what are we supposed to do with the rest of the Bible? What about verses that seem weird? Like, if your verse of the day is when he opened up the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for half an hour. What do you do with that verse from Revelation chapter 8? Or stories that seem crazy, like talking donkeys and voices coming out of the fire. Or commands don't make sense, like the command in Leviticus in the Old Testament that says, don't wear a Collie Plottin blend. If you wear a shirt made out of 2 different materials, then you're sinning. So does that mean I shouldn't wear a comfortable shirt? Because that doesn't seem right. The point is that sometimes there's a disconnect about what we're told about the Bible and what we actually experience when we read the Bible ourselves. We're told that the Bible can change us, that it can help us, that it can guide us, but when we take the time to read it ourselves, it can actually be quite confusing. And how can something so confusing change us, help us, and guide us? Is there something we're missing? Is there a different way to do this? And if there was a different way, would it help us to understand the verses like those who say, don't wear a Collie cotton blend? Is there a way for verses like that to be explained? The good news is there is a way forward. And understanding what the Bible is and understanding what it's meant to be helps us get the Bible in a way that maybe we haven't been able to do before. So let's start with some of the basics. So there's 2 halves to the Bible. There's the Old Testament, also known as the Hebrew Scriptures, and there's the New Testament. The Old Testament is the Jewish Bible, and it's basically pre-Jesus. The New Testament includes Jesus' life, the start of the church, Jesus dying, and coming back to life. But within those 2 parts, there's a lot going on. It's a big book, and in fact, it's not a book at all. Here's what I actually mean. The Bible is 66 different documents that got put together. They're poetry books. There's books that include laws given to people of Israel. There's books written to the Israelites on their history, wisdom books, books containing advice, books that are letters, lots of letters written to lots of different people, different parts of the world, and to different churches. They're all wrapped up in one big book. To better understand this, I want you to think about the words that you've read in your regular life. Maybe words from poetry class that were required reading in English class. When I was a kid, I loved Shel Silverstein poetry, Where the Sidewalk Ends. Then there's a textbook for history class. Maybe you're reading a different kind of book that your friend gave you for Christmas and it's super entertaining. And they're all nothing alike, but you're reading more than that too, because on your phone, those BuzzFeed news articles pop up, instruction manuals if you want to do the update on your phone. And maybe your friends are reading anime or something, and then you're reading all your text messages. So imagine all of those mashed together in one big pile. We put a whole cover on it, and we're like, sweet, here's your whole life as a book. I mean, it's kind of true, right? Like a big part of your life is in here, but also it's not all the same, right? Because like, what if somebody opened up the giant book to the part that was originally your history textbook that was talking about the War of 1812? Or what if someone read the text as if they were history or really bad poetry? And then this is scary. What if they read the whole thing front to back and assumed the whole thing was in chronological order? Maybe they would assume you were born during the American Revolution, grew up during Shakespeare's time, and lived through the invention of the cell phone. I know this sounds a little ridiculous, but here's what I'm getting at. We do this to the Bible all the time because all the documents have one big cover around them and we call it the Bible. People get confused and believe it's all the same, or it's all in order, or every single piece of it is meant to be read in the same way, and that can be confusing. When we read the Bible without understanding what we're actually reading, that makes it hard. The Bible is actually 66 different documents, and if we're missing that important piece, we're going to miss out on the context and the understanding. Sometimes it's helpful for me to say to myself, like, I'm not just reading the Bible, I'm not just reading a book, I'm reading a letter written to a specific group of people living in the first century. Or I'm reading pieces of wise advice the father wrote down for his son. Or maybe even I'm reading a history book that recorded everything that happened. Or I'm reading a song written to God by someone who knew him well. Even I'm reading an eyewitness account of somebody who actually got to hang out with Jesus, which is amazing. Context matters. It changes how we read everything. So let's look at two passages. The first is from 2 Timothy. This is what we know. It's called 2 Timothy because it was the second letter written to a guy named Timothy. The Apostle Paul, a mentor and a close friend of Timothy, he wrote it. And Timothy was a pastor in a church in Ephesus that was full of people who were struggling with all kinds of problems. And here's what Paul writes. Only Luke is with me. Bring Mark with you when you come, for he'll be helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Titius to Ephesus. When you come, be sure to bring the coat I left with Carpus at Troas. Also bring my books, and especially bring my papers. That's 2 Timothy 4:11 through 13. Context makes this make sense. Paul left his jacket, and he wants Timothy to bring it back. Okay, let me give you a second example. If you've been around the church for a while, then you've potentially read or heard this verse. For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength, Philippians 4:13. With no context, this verse makes it seem like I have stumbled across the magic genie of the Bible. I can dunk a 10-foot basketball goal through Christ who gives me strength. I can pass Spanish without studying through Christ who gives me strength. I can get multiple dates to my senior prom through Christ who gives me strength. With no context at all, this actually sounds like a formula for living the life of our dreams. But does it mean what we think it means? Here, context helps. This was also another letter written by Paul, but this time it was written to an entire church. And imagine if one of our growth group leaders, he had to move away, but he wanted to write a letter to the entire high school ministry. And he said, hey, Heather, read this next week. And I said, okay. So that's kind of like the letter written to the whole group at the church. But there's more. Paul wrote to them from prison. He was in jail because he was arrested for being a Christian and telling people about it. And in this part of the letter, Paul is saying, hey, thank you so much for sending me financial support. Thanks for being kind. And at the same time, he's saying, you don't need to feel obligated to send me more money. Paul let them know, like, I'll be okay if I have a little bit of money or a lot of bit of money. It's like he's saying, I have a full stomach sometimes, and I have kind of a hungry one sometimes, and I've learned to be content either way. So this section is really about contentment. And Paul is letting them know that he has figured out how to be peaceful and content with his life, whether it's going well or whether it's not. So, how can Paul find contentment even as he writes from prison with things not that great for him? For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Paul was dependent upon Jesus. His close relationship with Jesus gave him the power and strength to persevere and to find peace even when things were tough. So the point isn't so much like we can win this basketball game because God is on our side. It's more like because of Jesus, we can be okay, whether we have a lot of money or a little bit of money, whether life is going our way or whether it's not. We can turn our attention away from our circumstances and on to Jesus. We can find peace through him. See how the verse changes when we discover context? It helps us understand it better, and it explains what we're supposed to do with it now. Think of it this way. Context creates clarity. Another way to say this is when you know the whole story, things make more sense. Imagine you found a note on the floor at school. I know this is like real old school and you guys have cell phones, but imagine you find this note, you pick it up because we're all going to pick it up and read the note because if you're like me, you're just a little bit nosy. So you pick it up, you open the note, and it just says, hey, Sarah, quit acting like a bully. I already told you I'm sorry. Why can't you just drop it? Would you read the note and think, am I acting like a bully to someone? What am I holding on to that I need to let go? No, you'd be like, who's Sarah and who wrote it to her? I want to get to the bottom of this. You would understand the note was written to someone else. You would assume they had conflict in their friendship, and you would accept the fact that there is more to the story than you know at that moment. But sometimes when we read the Bible, we read it like we read a note that wasn't written to us. We randomly pick a passage or a verse. We have no idea why it was written, who wrote it. We assume we should just do exactly what they say, what's written in the document. No wonder it can be confusing sometimes. With background and bigger picture behind words in the Bible, we're not left to guessing. We can start to understand the context. So we don't want to miss it. If the point of the Bible is to know God better, it's too important to just guess what's going on. If we miss the backstory, if we miss the big picture, we run the risk of missing out on understanding the God behind all of it. So, instead of being overwhelmed by what we don't understand, let's look for what we can learn in context. The next time you come across a verse you don't understand, try asking these questions. 1, who wrote it and who was it written to? Sometimes a passage doesn't make sense until we understand who the audience is. You can start there. 2, why was it written down? 2 Timothy, it was written to encourage a friend in leadership. Philippians, it was written to remind a group of people they were loved by God. When you figure out the why, it can help you understand more clearly what was written and why it was written. 3, what made people think this information should be written or saved? Over thousands of years since these texts were written down, decisions had to be made about which texts would be included and what would not be included. And what you're reading right now, people realized it was so important to protect. And then 4, is it helpful to me or not? All parts might not be equally helpful. A tip could be to read a passage of scripture until you bump up against something that is helpful and then stop there. Think about it. Maybe write down a few thoughts on why it's helpful and what you plan on doing with it. You guys, the Bible has the ability to change our lives, but sometimes getting to the part that can be life-changing takes more than just closing my eyes, opening my Bible, choosing a random verse, and going with the first words I see. Context creates clarity. It helps us discover who wrote it, why they wrote it, How is this helpful to anyone to even read it? As we discover what's helpful, we become people who are changed for the better. So, what if you and I made the decision to quit looking at the Bible with all kinds of confusion and start looking at it with courage instead? Instead of us throwing up our hands and giving up because the Bible just doesn't make sense, what if we approached it with curiosity, if we put in the effort to discover why things were written? What if we took the Bible seriously, even when they don't immediately make sense? My prayer for you this week is that you're spending time reading the Bible and that you're helping yourself to figure out the context, because it will bring you clarity.